Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we'll go through step by step how to transfer shares in a private limited company registered in the UK. This is the 2025 edition. If you're new, I'm Malcolm Zoppi, an English qualified solicitor, and to make things as easy as possible for you, in this video I'll be doing two main things. Number one, I will share my screen so you can see exactly what needs to be done step by step. And number two, I will link in the description below templates and easy to use documents that you can download right now. With this video and my easy to use templates, anyone can do this. By the end of this video, if you follow along, you'll have the entire process finished. Fantastic. So the first thing that you need to do is download the templates. So pause this video, download the templates and come back to the video once you've downloaded the documents. Again, the documents, the templates are linked in the description below. Fantastic. Now that these are downloaded, let's get started. Great, so you should now be able to see my screen. And the first document that you need to pull up on your screen or your computer is the step-by-step guide. This is what it looks like. Okay, there are 8 main steps involved, starting with step number 1, which is for the seller of these shares to complete the stock transfer form and send it to the buyer. Now, the stock transfer form is document E, which is with the templates that you downloaded, and this is what it looks like. To try and make things as easy as possible for you, I've highlighted in green the information that you need to input, or the seller needs to input, and it's also enclosed within the square brackets. So to give you an example, let me zoom in very quickly. Here you'll want to put the name of the companies whose shares are being held. So for example, if the shares are of company XYZ Ltd, then you'll put here XYZ Ltd, and then the registration number as shown on Companies House for XYZ Ltd. Here you'll need to put the type of share that is being sold. Typically it's an ordinary share of £1 each. And then again, here you put the nominal value of the share. Typically the nominal value is £1. And the nominal value is not to be confused with the market value of the share. Now the market value varies depending on the market, on, for example, the valuation of the company. It can go up and down, and it's typically just determined by the buyer and the seller. How much is the seller willing to sell the share for, and how much is the buyer willing to buy the share for. Instead, the nominal value isn't determined on that basis. The nominal value is determined when the shares are issued. So the company determines the nominal value. If you are the founder of the company, you will see this in your company's information. Okay, then we'll move on to specifying how many shares are being sold. For example, 50, and we'll want to write it in letters and then put it as figures as well here. Here we'll want to input the details of the seller. The seller then signs and dates the stock transfer form and puts the name and address of the buyer right here. Okay, fantastic. Now that we've done this, let's come back to the step-by-step guide and move on to step number 2. The seller will take the stock transfer form and the share certificate for the shares that are being sold and give it to the buyer. Now, it's very possible that the seller has lost their share certificate, or they were never given a share certificate by the company, for example, because the company is quite small and didn't know of the legal requirement of producing share certificates. If that is the case, then you will need to complete document A. Document A is a share certificate indemnity, which in short tries to replace the share certificate. This is what the share certificate indemnity looks like. It's document A as mentioned, and as always, you'll simply need to replace the information in the square brackets and the square brackets with your relevant information. Once the seller has given their share certificate or share certificate indemnity and the stock transfer form to the buyer, we can then move on to step number 3, which is, if relevant, the buyer needs to pay stamp duty tax on the purchase of those shares. Now you can check via this link whether the buyer needs to pay stamp duty, and ideally the buyer would seek their own tax advice regarding this aspect. But typically or generally, a buyer needs to pay stamp duty if the purchase price for the shares is more than £1,000. If the purchase price for the shares is £1,000 or less, then the buyer typically does not pay stamp duty, and in this case we'll want to skip step number 4 and move on to step number 5. But for the purposes of this video, let's assume that the purchase price is more than £1,000 and therefore stamp duty is payable. At the time of recording this video, on shares, stamp duty is 0.5% of the purchase price. So in that case, the buyer will want to visit this link, which is the government's website, and then find HMRC's bank account details here, specifying to which account the stamp duty tax needs to be paid. The buyer will want to use a payment reference when sending the money to HMRC, and this payment reference typically is made up of their name and then the payment amount, how much stamp duty they've paid. Once the buyer has paid stamp duty to HMRC, they want to send HMRC an email attaching their stock transfer form so that HMRC can stamp duty, stamp their form and send it back to the buyer. So this is step number 4, and to make things as easy as possible, I've included a template email that you can simply copy and paste and amend and then send to HMRC, and it's in document B. This is what document B looks like. And again, we have HMRC's bank account details, but make sure that these are up to date via the link that we had shown earlier, this one right here. Okay, then you'll want to include the reference, the payment reference that you used when sending the money to HMRC. And this is the suggested template email that you might want to consider using. So here we have the subject of the email, again, include your reference, and then this specific information. Make sure to, again, attach to the email the stock transfer form signed by the seller when sending the email to HMRC. For your convenience, I've also included a completed example email as if I, Malcolm Zoppi, were buying shares for £60,000. Amazing. Coming back to the step-by-step guide. Let's assume that this has been done, but what happens if instead no stamp duty is payable? In that case, the buyer needs to go and complete certificate number 1 in the stock transfer form. Okay, so the buyer needs to pull up the stock transfer form that the seller will have given to them, scroll down to certificate number 1, which is this one right here on page number 2, and they will need to include their full name, signature, and the date of their signature. And that is done. Once that has been done, they just hold on to the stock transfer form, and we need to move on to step number 5. The buyer will need to present the stock transfer form to the company, to the directors of the company. Now, the stock transfer form will either need to be stamped by HMRC if stamp duty was payable, or the buyer will need to have completed certificate number 1 if no stamp duty was payable. Great, so the buyer takes their stock transfer form with the share certificate that was given to them by the seller and gives it to the company. That is when we can move on to step number 5, which is the directors of the company meet to approve the transfer from the seller to the buyer. To evidence this approval, we need to complete document C, which are the board minutes, i.e. the records of the decisions that are being taken by the board of directors. This is what document C looks like, and as always, we have the square brackets that need to be replaced with your relevant information. Fantastic. Coming back to the step-by-step guide, we can move on to step number 6, which is to complete or update the internal registers of the company. For a template of the internal statutory registers, see document F. This is what document F looks like. In short, it's simply a spreadsheet that records important information about the company, such as who are the members, i.e. the shareholders of the company, who are the people with significant control, and who are the directors of the company. Fantastic. Coming back to the step-by-step guide, we move on to step number 7, which is the company issues a new share certificate to the buyer of those shares. Now, the share certificate is going to evidence the fact that the buyer is a new rightful owner of those shares. To make things as easy as possible, I've created document D1 and D2. Document D1 is a drafting guide that shows you exactly how to draft the share certificate. So we have the different numbers here that relate to these matters here. So for example, point number 1 relates to point number 1 down here. And then we have the actual Word template of a share certificate that you can then complete. Fantastic. Coming back to the step-by-step guide, we can now move on to the final step, which is to update Companies House with any notifications that need to be made. You can do so via your web filing account. And for example, it might be possible that the seller is no longer a person of significant control, and therefore that register on Companies House needs to be updated, and the buyer instead has become a person with significant control, and therefore their details need to be submitted to Companies House. Now, I appreciate that this process is not easy. There are quite a few things to consider, quite a few steps involved, and quite a few documents to draft. For this, if you want further support, feel free to reach out. I can either take care of the entire process for you, or I can help you on an hourly basis where you jump on a call with me, share your screen, and I offer some guidance. Do let me know your thoughts. Please comment below whether you found the video useful and what I can improve upon. Thank you for watching.